to middle-class families who want to secure themselves against possible poverty. I respectfully ask my colleagues to support this amendment because reducing Medicaid spending while improving the lives of seniors and persons with disabilities is a conversation worthy of this office. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment would simply ignore the millions of dollars that have been spent by this administration to reach the same conclusion that so many unbiased analysts had said for years. The class program is unworkable, causing a liability for the potential beneficiary and the taxpayers alike. This amendment would promote reckless governing that maintains a failed program for further meddling. The class program has done nothing to decrease Medicaid spending, and its inclusion in the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was a budget gimmick that will cost the American taxpayers $80 billion over the next 10 years. Alternative policies, such as the Long-Term Care Partnership Program, which was signed into law by President Bush, have decreased Medicaid spending and deterred Americans from making Medicaid their primary payer of long-term care services. That program alone has done more for Medicaid spending than class ever will. We can and should do more to decrease Medicaid spending and ensure Americans have the access they need to affordable long-term care coverage. But government intrusion into the market is not the way to go. However, we cannot move forward in thinking about better long-term care policies with this failed program hanging over us. Yesterday, Senator Harkin made it clear that the problem with the class program was that it was voluntary. A vote in favor of this amendment is a vote in favor of another mandate on the American people. Enough is enough. We must get this failed program off the books so that we can move forward in establishing long-term care policies that work for the American taxpayers, not those that further bankrupt this country. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment from the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Gentleman from Florida.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. For purposes, the gentleman from Florida seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment
Designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Deutsch of Florida.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this amendment reads, the Secretary shall develop 3 actuarially sound benefit plans. This amendment's small fix gives the administration the ability to implement a program that enjoys the support of 2/3 of all Americans, including, I should add, over half of Republicans. The stipulation for moving forward, however, is that class is implemented on an actuarially sound basis. The distinguished gentleman from Louisiana and author of the underlying bill has expressed some opposition to my amendment, suggesting that it will waive the solvency requirement. I respect the gentleman's work and service, but I regret that that claim is simply untrue. This amendment gives the Secretary's waiver authority only after 3 requirements are met. The plan must be actuarially sound, must address adverse selection, and must have market appeal. The deliberate obfuscation of this amendment's intention is a textbook example of why Americans are fed up with Washington. I would work with anyone in any party to protect the financial security of middle class and near retirees. But when attempts to improve the existing law in a fiscally responsible way are treated in this manner, it is no wonder why we can't get things done. The bill's proponents say, trust us, we'll replace this. Unfortunately, over a year ago, they said the same thing about the Affordable Care Act. Instead, we had repeal and replace minus the replace. As we all know, the class program as drafted is facing challenges of implementation. Critics have focused on fiscal sustainability. The good news is that there is a fiscally sustainable path forward. With greater flexibility, a program could be designed that addresses adverse selection and improves market appeal. We must remember that even with implementation, class would only be a start addressing a very serious long-term care crisis. Looking back on our history would serve us well today. In the infancy of Social Security, Senator William King, a Democrat from Utah, supported a Clark amendment which would have undercut the Social Security program. He was concerned that Social Security would crowd out private pensions and conditioned his support of Social Security upon a guarantee that the Clark amendment would later be taken up. When Congress returned, Senator King was asked about the amendment. He said, "You can forget about the amendment. The passage of the Social Security Act has got everybody talking about pension plans. You can forget it forever." Americans ought to be talking about long-term care, and we should all be lucky enough to grow older. We should all be lucky enough to retire in South Florida. However, no one is immune from the frailty of old age, and no one is exempt from disability. I can't help but think of a very impressive man from South Florida, a good friend named Alan Brown, who on January 2nd, 1988, at the age of 20, was hit by a strong wave at the beach that caused a catastrophic spinal cord injury that leaves him a quadriplegic to this day. Mr. Brown has an endless list of expenses, from his wheelchair and medication to disability through accessible transportation and long-term care. Even while holding 2 jobs, he struggles to support his family in the face of rising health care costs. As lawmakers, it is our responsibility to remember that those who are young and healthy may not always remain so, and act on the fact that long-term care is out of reach for the majority of Americans. Any one of us could experience an unpredictable accident like Mr. Brown. And if that is not compelling enough, the inevitability of aging should be. What message is this Congress sending when our response to the long-term care crisis is just say no? Why should Americans be thinking about long-term care if their leaders in Congress answer a complicated and systemic problem with a politically charged 2-page bill? If the Secretary were given the flexibility in my amendment, the class program would remain the furthest thing from an entitlement, as it would remain fully financed by premiums. This fix to class is a true fiscal responsibility and individual retirement security, and I respectfully urge my colleagues to support it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Purpose of the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition.
Rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The amendment number 5, or Deutsch 2, is an amendment essentially that the Secretary of Health and Human Services has already looked at some of these provisions in 8 different ways and trying to come up with some possibility of certifying the fiscal solvency of this class act within the 75-year budget window, the out years. And thank goodness, Mr. Chairman, for the wisdom of Senator Judd Gregg on the Senate side when that amendment was accepted in the Help Committee. I don't know whether it was unanimously accepted by the Democrats, but I think it was. And again, the prescience and the wisdom of Senator Gregg is something the American people should be, and I think will be, eternally grateful for. Look, the Secretary looked at the possibility of saying that we'll make this fiscally solvent if we eliminate eligibility for anybody with a pre-existing condition. Then they said, well, no, that's not going to work, so let's say, how about a 15-year waiting period for someone with pre-existing conditions? And finally, ultimately, looked at the possibility of yet again making this part of Obamacare the class program a mandatory participation. How has that worked out for them thus far in regard to the exchange and young people being forced under the rules of the Constitution of the Commerce Clause to do that under the penalty of law, increased taxes or penalties or whatever they want to call it? Well, the Supreme Court ultimately will make that decision. So the Secretary, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, had every opportunity to look at this. And we're talking about, and I say to the gentleman from Florida, over a 15, 18-month period of time, and they absolutely could not certify it. Now, you know, you can delay and delay and delay, but what part of no does the gentleman not understand? No, this will not work. And this amendment is unnecessary. We know that this program will not work. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they want to leave the provision in the bill. They want to let it stand there so they can somehow, I guess, maybe the next administration or the next chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee or whomever on their side of the aisle might want to resurrect Freddie Krueger one more time. One more time, and on the backs of the American taxpayer. This is a fiscal train wreck. And the bill actually, Mr. Chairman, calls for the provision of a plan at a date certain, October of 2012. I'm an OB/GYN physician. That's less than 9 months. You know, that goes quickly. I know that, about 9 months. And when you get there, folks that are looking and counting on the class program, long-term care insurance, and they want to sign up for it, and the federal government says, well, I know it's on the books, I know it's still part of the law, I know we obligated to have a program for you to choose from by October the 1st of 2012, but hey, you know, we decided not to go forward with it. What's to prevent them from suing the federal government? And while these lawsuits are pending and going on and on and on, I mean, you know, an attorney jobs bill, I guess it would have some merit. But in the meantime, the private market for long-term care insurance, they're not innovative. They're not going to do anything until the legality of that is all cleared up. So, you know, we feel very strongly that this would be a bad amendment, and I strongly oppose it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Gentleman from Florida.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. What purpose does the gentlelady from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I move to strike the last word.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Here we are again, ladies and gentlemen. The lights are up, the music is playing, and my Republican colleagues are doing the same old song and dance for the American people. The Republicans have spread out their sand, and they're doing their best soft shoe routine, trying to convince the American people that the repeal of this bill is in their best interest. As the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yet we find ourselves here debating the repeal of a law that would have sought to address the long-term health care crisis burgeoning in this country. Mr. Chairman, to most people, finding a solution to the long-term care insurance crisis in this country seems like a good law. It must be if 56 national groups, including AARP and SEIU, are against repealing the Class Act. But once again, my Republican colleagues are trying their best to distract the American people from their not seeking a solution with this repeal the bill sideshow. You know, as we debate this repeal, I've heard so many of our colleagues refer to the President as him needing to come and apologize for introducing this provision in the Affordable Care Act And it occurs to me, Mr. Chair, that the effort to embarrass the President, to harass him, to defy him, that this is more important than finding a solution to the growing challenge of the aging population. And indeed, it is a emerging, burgeoning problem. 10 million Americans need long-term care. Over the next decade, another 5 million Americans will require this care, bringing the total to 15 million people. And the problem is only becoming more challenging, with estimates that nearly 70% of people, the baby boomers, will need some level of long-term care after turning 65. An additional issue is that this is a heavy burden on family budgets. This law was seeking to provide a national, voluntary, and self-sustaining insurance program for assistance to aid elderly and disabled people. It would allow individuals to live independently at home and in the community for as long as possible without impoverishing themselves. You know, it seems that my Republican colleagues are content to defer the dreams of millions of Americans to live with some sort of dignity as they age. And it reminds me of one of my favorite poets, an African-American poet, as we enjoy this Black History Month, who would be 110 years old today, Langston Hughes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? Millions of Americans Republicans want to put one man out of a job and would defer the dreams of millions of Americans. But while they continue their song and dance, Mr. Chair, denying seniors the long-term care they need and deserve, putting more and more Americans out of work, I hope the American people recognize who is really on their side before we see the American dream of living and retiring in dignity explode. And with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me first thank Congresswoman Winmore for her very passionate, compassionate, and very clear statement, and also Congressman Ellison, both of them, for their unwavering leadership and conviction on the real issues facing the American people today. As a former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and co-founder of the Congressional Out of Poverty Caucus, let me just say I rise in strong opposition to this bill. Mr. Chairman, members of the Progressive Caucus are here because once again the Republican leadership would rather attack the President than help the millions of struggling seniors, people with disabilities, and their families who are faced with a system that fails to meet their very basic needs. And this should really be a nonpartisan issue. We're here today because Republicans are more focused on ending Medicare and repealing a long-term care program than they are on creating jobs to put Americans back to work. Last year, Republicans' first order of business was to eliminate, mind you, eliminate the Medicare guarantee for America's seniors under the Ryan budget proposal. This year, it's the same old story. Instead of focusing on jobs or on extending middle-class tax cuts, unemployment assistance, or fixing the Medicare physician pay rate, this Tea Party Congress continues to waste time on pointless bills just to score political points. Repealing the class program will do nothing to address the long-term crisis for the 10 million Americans who need care now and the 5 million more who will require it over the next 10 years. Killing this program without offering any alternative is frankly irresponsible. The law may not be perfect, but repealing the bill does not make the problem go away. We should be doing everything we can to ensure that senior citizens and the disabled also have a shot at the American dream. We should not destroy this for them just because of their age or their disability. Why in the world would the Republican Tea Party want to throw them under the bus? We should work to find a real solution that meets the needs of the millions of baby boomers who are retiring now, senior citizens and the disabled, and should work to ensure that they get the long-term care over the next decade, which they will need. Rather than repeal this bill today, we need to give experts time to identify changes that would make the class program stronger, and Congress needs to focus on the real priorities of the day, and that's jobs and the economy. We have work to do, and we don't have a minute to waste. Let's not waste another year without a jobs bill and without extending vital unemployment benefits and payroll tax reductions to millions of Americans while our economy continues to recover. It's time for the Republican Tea Party to stop walking away from our senior citizens and the disabled, and to work with us to continue middle-class tax cuts, unemployment assistance, and ensure that seniors can keep seeing their doctors. We need to come together now to enact bold programs and policies that provide equal opportunity and equal access for every single American, no matter their race, no matter their employment status, no matter their humble beginnings, no matter their age, no matter their disability. We can't wait. Americans can't wait. This Congress should not wait. And so we need to really figure out a way that we're going to do the right thing on behalf of our senior citizens and the disabled. But I have to say today, unfortunately, this bill moves us in the wrong direction. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. For purposes, the gentlelady from California seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise today in strong opposition to H.R. 1173, the Republican legislation to repeal the CLASS program. CLASS was designed to be the first federal voluntary long-term care program, making long-term care more accessible and affordable for millions of Americans. The idea behind the CLASS program is to provide Americans, especially our seniors, with peace of mind if they suffer from an unexpected long-term illness or injury. We have a long-term care crisis in this country. According to Secretary Sebelius, an estimated 15 million Americans will need some kind of long-term care, and fewer than 3% have a long-term care policy. Because Medicare and other existing programs do not cover these services, we must work together to find a solution. And my Republican friends know, however, the CLASS program, as enacted, will not be implemented. Secretary Sebelius informed Congress last October that she did not see a viable path forward for CLASS implementation at this time. So in other words, this legislation we're debating today is not needed. Instead of legislation to create jobs and grow our economy, our Republican friends are focused on repealing a program that's already been suspended. I want to encourage my friends on the other side of the aisle to take a step back and focus on the things we could be doing together to make long-term care more affordable and accessible. The issue of providing long-term care, I've encountered this in my own life. My dear sweet mother, before she passed away last summer, received long-term care services for years before she passed away, and I will always remember the warmth and affection her caregivers showed her and my family day in and day out. And what we should be doing today is to ensure that the hard-working men and women who provide care for our seniors in their own homes earn a living wage, because these jobs are the jobs that make a difference and bring happiness to those whose help they need it most. With robust job growth predicted in the health care sector over the next decade, it's imperative that we support long-term care services and those that provide them. This is a win-win for the American economy, and not only do long-term care services provide jobs, but we know that if our seniors can be taken care of in their own home, it saves Americans money in the long run. I fear, however, that this legislation is meant as a step towards dismantling the health care reform law that Congress passed and the President signed, a law that does help millions of Americans obtain better and more affordable health care coverage over the next decade. And thanks to the Affordable Health Care Act, insurance companies cannot deny coverage to people with pre-existing conditions. Thanks to this Affordable Care Act, Americans now have access to free preventative care services. And thanks to the Affordable Care Act, small businesses can receive tax credit to provide their employees with health coverage. And thanks to the Affordable Care Act, children can stay on their parents' insurance until they're 26. We just hope they don't move back home. My colleagues, on the other side, let's not work to strip these provisions and put power back in the hands of for-profit insurance companies. We do not need this legislation. Instead of repealing a program that is not moving forward, why don't we work on replacing it with a better long-term care program? The Affordable Care Act is not a perfect law. That's why we should be working together to fix the problems, not just repeal it. These problems will remain even if we repeal this part of the law. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to stop this needless debate and legislation and get to work on the real issues at hand. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. For purposes, the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to repealing the Class Act. You know, we all get old, or hopefully we will all get old, reach an elderly status, and we will then perhaps become physically unable to get around a whole lot, and we may need to have some long-term care. And Tea Partiers will need it. Occupy Wall Streeters will need it. Mitt Romney and his group of 15% taxpayers will need it. The only question is whether or not the 99ers and the Tea Partiers will be able to afford it. That is the only question. We're in the same boat. The Class Act was included in the health care law in order to help elderly and functionally disabled Americans purchase the services they need, which would enable them to continue living in their communities as opposed to being forced into expensive private care, which most of us can't afford. So I understand that HHS has determined that the Class Act cannot be implemented as written based on financial considerations. But ladies and gentlemen, that's no reason to throw out or to repeal this worthwhile initiative. We certainly need to improve it, but there's no need to repeal it. No matter what side of the political aisle you sit on, you cannot ignore that we need to improve access to long-term care. Approximately 10 million Americans are in need of long-term care, and this number is expected to increase to 15 million over the next decade. America is aging. In 2009, an estimated 62 million unpaid family caregivers provided $450 billion in care. At what cost? To their jobs, to their family life with their children. In 2011, the average annual cost of a nursing home was $70,000. Who can afford that? The cost of long-term care is an unsustainable burden on family members who, while also holding a job and raising a family, struggle to provide their disabled or elderly relatives with the care that they need to continue living within their own communities. The Class Act is a voluntary program. It's no mandate. Don't get it twisted. There is no mandate, individual mandate for the Class Act. It's a voluntary program that relies on free market principles of responsibility and competition that my colleagues in the Republican Party claim to revere. There's no mandate in this program. It would allow families of all means to plan for a secure future where a long life or a disability does not lead to financial ruin. Take, for instance, one of my constituents, Linda Rollins. Linda was the primary caregiver for her elderly mother until her recent passing. Linda told me that she supports the Class Act because millions of Americans, just like her, feel overwhelmed or face financial distress due to their roles as family caregivers who cannot receive any kind of assistance. Although Linda's mother received long-term care through a local senior assistance program that enabled her to continue living at home, Linda knows that not everyone is so lucky. Having access to long-term care services enabled Linda's mother to live independently, with grace, and with dignity. It allowed Linda to keep her job and helped relieve the emotional and financial strains placed on her and her family as she oversaw her mother's care. Linda and I feel like everyone should have that kind of support, and the Class Act is a good place to start. Repealing the Class Act without any attempt to improve it is a rash political move, and I urge my colleagues to oppose the bill.
Gentleman's time expired.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Strike the last word.
Mr. Chairman.
Georgia. For the purpose of the gentleman from Georgia, seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you. As we alternate back and forth, I request time to move to strike the requisite number of words.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I thank the courtesy of my colleague from Minnesota, and obviously he'll have that opportunity as well, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Yeah, I thank you for that ruling, Mr. Chairman, because I felt like it was important for me to respond directly in immediate proximity to my colleague and good friend, very good friend from Georgia, the gentleman from DeKalb. He made the statement about, well, you know, what is the reason? There's no reason really to strike this. Why not leave it on the books? And I think that's the argument that we've heard all afternoon in regard to the position of the Democratic side. But let me just read a few passages from a report that we requested from the Congressional Research Service as to why, in response to my friend from DeKalb and my good colleague from Georgia. Judicial review assumes that the Secretary takes no further action to comply with the Class Act's statutory mandate to designate a benefit plan by October the 1st, 2012, the Secretary would appear to be committing a facial violation of the statutory requirement to designate such a plan. Her failure to take such action conceivably could be challenged in court under the Administrative Procedures Act, APA, which defines agency action to include the failure to act. They go on to say that the Class Act does not preclude judicial review, and the Secretary's designation of a benefit plan is a mandatory as opposed to a discretionary requirement. So judicial review does not appear to be precluded. Therefore, if the Secretary fails to perform the action required by the statute, that inaction would appear to be reviewable. I continue. A failure by the Secretary to designate a class benefit plan by October the 1st, 2012, presumably predicated upon a determination by her that it is not possible to develop 3 actuarially sound benefit plans that meet all the requirements of the Act, would appear to be a final agency action from which, quote, legal consequences will flow, unquote. Inaction by the Secretary in designating a plan by the deadline could be found by a reviewing court to constitute noncompliance with a statutory mandate. Thus, after October the 1st, 2012, the Secretary's failure to take an action legally required of her would appear to meet the standard for judicial review of agency inaction unlawfully withheld under the APA, Administrative Procedures Act, provision prescribing the scope of judicial review of agency action. Look, I asked one of my colleagues a few minutes ago, what part of no do you not understand? I mean, this is pretty darn clear, and I would, it's a I'll be glad to yield to my friend.
Thank you, my friend from Georgia. What you've just said is that essentially a failure to act, to publish regulations or to promulgate regulations that would lead to the enactment of this Class Act becomes a final agency action. In other words, failure to act becomes a final agency action which then enables a appeal or judicial review. The review being for the purposes, I suppose, of failing to follow the law, which would, of course, be in support of the underlying legislation, the Class Act. So I would argue that that the regulation that you cite would actually enhance the ability of us to come to a reasonable way of financing this voluntary program.
Reclaim my time from the gentleman. Look, the gentleman, Mr. Chairman, is the attorney. I'm just an old country doctor. But, you know, this is plain language, and I'll be happy to provide his office with a copy of this Congressional Research Service report. I'm not going to get into deep into the weeds of the legal argument back and forth, but this is about as plain as a nose on your face. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. For purposes, the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition.
To strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'll tell you what's as plain as the nose on your face. What's as plain as the nose on your face is that the Republicans are getting rid of a plan for long-term care without offering any alternative plan in its place. They're just stripping what's there without saying, here's what we're going to do. But I have a memory, Mr. Chairman, and what I remember is that for long stretches of time in the last decade, Republicans had both houses and the presidency, didn't do anything on health care other than do a big giveaway to Big Pharma. When the Democrats get in, we do a plan. We pass the Affordable Care Act. Does it need tinkering? Probably so, like all bills do. But instead of trying to work with us to do something good for the American people, Republicans say we're just going to strip the Democratic plan for long-term care. And this is too bad, because it seems to me that long-term care, Mr. Speaker, is a legitimate issue for us to work together on. But we're not working together. One side passes a bill, the other side just tries to get rid of it. I think that it's high time we start trying to work together, but we don't have a cooperative partner. Washington Republicans are proving once again that they would rather try to embarrass President Obama than help America's seniors. Last year, Republicans' first order of business was to eliminate the Medicare guarantee for America's seniors. This year, it's the same old story, Mr. Speaker. No health care, no Medicare, no long-term care for millions of Americans. Instead of a plan to create jobs or to extend middle-class tax cuts or to address unemployment insurance assistance or to fix Medicare physician pay rate, Republicans are wasting time on divisive and pointless bills.
Would the gentleman yield to me for just a brief moment?
I do respect the gentleman's desire to have me yield, but I must very, very respectfully decline because I have limited time. But if I have any time,
won't yield to let me mention about the long-term care partnership program.
The gentleman from Georgia will suspend.
Under President Bush, covering 280,000.
The gentleman from Georgia will suspend. The gentleman from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I have any extra time, I'll be happy to yield to the gentleman, but it'll have to be when I'm done. Today, we could be dealing with the real issue, fixing the long-term care crisis. And I'm sure that everyone in this whole body, Republican and Democrat, ought to be concerned about it, because all of us, no matter what our ideological beliefs may be, have people who need long-term care. So we got to be about this business. You know what, Mr. Speaker? 10 million Americans currently need long-term care, and the problem is only getting worse. A number of Americans 62 years and older is 20% higher than it was 10 years ago. Long-term care is a huge burden on families. An estimated 62 million, let me say that one more time, Mr. Speaker, 62 million unpaid family caregivers provided care valued at $450 billion in 2009, more than the total spending in Medicare that year. But Republicans are offering no solutions to the long-term care crisis. They can say anything they want, but they're not coming here with a bill that we can debate. They're just attacking what has already been done, which is so easy to do. Way better to be a critic than to be someone who produces solutions. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you a little bit about somebody in my district, Mary. Mary, it says, here's what Mary says. My mother is 90 and seriously ill and now in a nursing home. Her bill is over $6,500 a month, Mr. Speaker, and Mary goes on to say that she will soon run out of money, referring to her mom. Why do people have to become indigent before they receive help? That's a good question, I think. That's a question warranting our attention. But our Republican friends have no plan to protect families like Mary's. They're not here with a plan. They just want to strip and rip and take down what Democrats have already done. And people are in need of help. So, Mr. Speaker, repealing the Class Act will not help Mary's family. We need to make the Class Act program stronger, not get rid of it. We need to mend it, not end it. We need to improve it. And that's why 56 national groups wrote to Congress saying, please don't repeal the Class Act, including AARP, Mr. Speaker, SEIU, and the National Council on Aging, people who really know what they're talking about when it comes to long-term care. And so I urge our Republican friends on both sides of the aisle to come together with us to make a strong long-term program for seniors rather than just tearing down and stripping down. It's as plain as the nose on your face, Mr. Speaker. Americans need long-term care, and I do yield back.
The gentleman yields
the
back.
last word.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Vermont seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 5 minutes.
You know, we have a serious challenge here. We have people that need long-term care. We've got very significant fiscal constraints. And the question before us, really, is do we repeal the program altogether when there is a serious long-term problem, as if by legislative magic a repeal suddenly makes the serious and acute problem vanish altogether. We know that doesn't happen. It may address a fiscal issue, but it doesn't solve a fiscal issue and enormous emotional pain that individuals who are trying to take care of their senior parents will face. So the problem doesn't go away if this legislation is passed. It simply means the pain will continue and probably intensify. So the real challenge for Congress is that when there is a problem that we acknowledge is real and rising for the American people, and the folks who need long-term care are in red states and blue states, they're in your district and they're in mine, the real question is whether we address that as actively and as aggressively as we can, taking responsible steps to make certain that we can pay for what we promise. The worst thing that we can do, in my view, is pass legislation that has almost as its predicate the notion that by repealing the commitment that this Congress made 2 years ago, the problem doesn't exist. It does, and we all know that. You've heard the statistics. 10 million Americans currently need long-term care. That is a tough challenge for those families. Over the next decade, that is going to rise to 15 million. That is a rising challenge that the longer we defer, the more difficult it will be for us to address it. 62 million Americans, good Americans, generous Americans, serve as unpaid caregivers to elderly family members. How long can that be sustained? And while nearly 70% of Americans will need some level of long-term care in their lifetime, only 8% are able to buy long-term care insurance. And that's where we do need a public policy program that's going to match the resources required with the need that's rising. The Class Act was designed to make progress, giving older Americans and their families some sense of security. It's not perfect. The most vigorous proponents of that legislation acknowledge it's not perfect. But what that we pass on the Republican side or the Democratic side can any of us claim is perfect. What we have to do together is try to make an imperfect bill better. But what we can't do is abandon the very serious challenge that those 10 million Americans that need a long-term care have. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For purposes, the gentlelady from California seek recognition.
I move to strike the last word.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker and members, this bill is just another attempt to dismantle health care reform. Last year, House Republicans passed H.R. 2 to repeal the entire Affordable Care Act, the landmark health care reform law that was enacted almost 2 years ago. Is what I'm referring to. The Affordable Care Act has already made a difference in the lives of millions of Americans. Let me just recount for the members of this House what the Affordable Care Act has done and is doing. It prevents insurance companies from dropping people because they get sick. It prevents insurance companies from denying coverage to children with pre-existing conditions. It allows young adults to remain on their parents' health insurance until they turn 26. It provides free preventive care to seniors under Medicare. It is phasing out the donut hole and helping seniors obtain affordable prescription drugs. Finally, it provides tax credits to help small businesses purchase health insurance for their employees. When H.R. 2 failed to move in the Senate, House Republicans began passing bills to dismantle the Affordable Care Act piece by piece and inch by inch. They passed H.R. 1213, which repeals funding for the Organization of Health Benefit Exchanges, marketplaces where American families will be able to choose an affordable health care plan. They passed H.R. 1214, which repeals funding for the construction of school-based health clinics. They passed H.R. 1216, which repeals funding for the training of primary care physicians. Now, they're trying to repeal the Class Act. The Class Act is the Community Living Assistance Services and Supports Act, and it establishes a program to facilitate access to long-term health care services. Who can be against that? The Class Act is a voluntary program to provide participants with a cash benefit that can be used to purchase a variety of long-term care services such as home modifications, accessible transportation, personal assistance services, homemaker services, respite care, home health aides, and nursing support. The program would be funded entirely by the premiums paid by those who choose to participate. House Republicans' Class Act repeal also repeals funding for the National Clearinghouse for Long-Term Health Information. The Clearinghouse provides online information about long-term care costs and planning options. Our nation is indeed facing a long-term health crisis. People are living longer. As a result, there's a growing need for long-term care for elderly and disabled Americans. There are 10 million people who need long-term care in the United States today. That number is expected to grow to 15 million in the year 2020. There are an estimated 52 million unpaid caregivers providing long-term care services in American homes today. American families are paying more than $50 billion every year on out-of-pocket expenses for long-term care. These families need options, and they need our support. The Class Act does not need to be repealed. If House Republicans believe this program should be fixed, then they should try and fix it. However, they have not even attempted to improve this program or develop other options to make long-term care services available to American families who need them. It is long past due for House Republicans to stop trying to dismantle health care reform and start working with us in a constructive, bipartisan manner to improve our nation's health care system. I would urge my colleagues to oppose this bill and support solutions to America's long-term care crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are discussing today is precisely what Occupy Wall Street was all about. It's about what are we going to do to deal with that 99% out there who simply need some safety nets that the government could easily assist with. Health care is a problem in this country. Not everyone can afford it, and I would ask my colleagues to take the politics out of this issue. The American public needs this health care reform. And the Occupy Wall Street people who were out there simply sent a message to say, okay, America, stop being simply on the side of the 1%. Look at the 99%. I would urge my colleagues to do that. I yield back the balance.
Gentlelady's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill to repeal the Class Act. Last year, we watched as Republicans implemented a slash-and-burn offensive against almost every and any federal program that helps people. No matter that the program helps women or children or seniors or sick people, let's get rid of it. Apparently, this year is no difference. With this bill, Republicans have set their eyes on the Class Act, which, when implemented, will help provide some relief to aging Americans, as well as to those who love and care for them. The CLASS program was designed to combat the rapidly increasing cost of long-term care, costs that currently account for nearly half of all health care spending in this country. By helping enrollees in the program to afford a variety of long-term care services, such as home modifications, assistive technology, accessible transportation, respite care, home health care aides, and nursing support. Currently, long-term care facilities cost on average $70,000 per year, and home health care aides can cost $25 per hour in some areas. How many middle-class families can afford that? I understand the concerns that my Republican colleagues have voiced. As currently structured, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that the program will not be solvent beyond about 2029, about 20 years from now. But what is the Republicans' knee-jerk solution to all budget issues? To trash a program, a necessary program, that will provide much-needed support for seniors today and in the future. This is completely wrong-headed. We should not destroy this program and ignore the problem. People will still grow older, hopefully, and they will need assisted living, they will need home health care, they will need accessible transportation. At some point, we are going to have to face this issue. The current situation, where Medicaid will pay for this, but only after the family has impoverished itself and eliminated all their assets, is not a long-term solution. It's not a tolerable solution. Why should middle-class families who have worked all their lives have to impoverish themselves if an elderly relative needs home health care or assisted living or a nursing home? Our job here is to make people's lives better, to identify problems and to find solutions. We've certainly identified a problem. There is simply no denying that only the wealthiest among us can possibly afford to pay $70,000 a year for a nursing home. So let's do our jobs. Let's roll up our sleeves and work to make this program better. Let's work to make it solvent, not simply eliminate it. Let's not simply abandon middle-class Americans who are scared to death that after working their entire lives and playing by the rules, they will have to bankrupt their children and grandchildren just to have any sense of dignity as they grow older. This is not the American dream. We don't want to tell our old people, get lost, get out of sight, go into the poorhouses and the almshouses we had before Social Security. We don't want to tell our seniors, you can't have the health care, the home assisted living, the home health care aides that you need. We don't want to tell our families that you must impoverish yourselves, sell off all your assets because your mother or your grandmother is sick or can no longer live independently. This is why we have government, to solve problems for all of us that we cannot solve for ourselves individually. That is the reason for government, to provide for the common welfare, as the Constitution says. We know we have this problem. We know as the population ages, the problem is going to get worse and more intense, not better. We know the problem is not going to go away. So let's deal with it. After many, many years, Congress, in the Affordable Care Act, finally passed the Class Act program to start dealing with this. There are problems with it. Yes, the financing that was brought into that program is only sufficient for about 20 years. That gives us only 20 years to fix the program. Now, the sooner we fix it, the sooner we amend the financing, the easier it'll be to do it. The longer we wait, the harder. So what do the Republicans want to do? Kill the whole program, put our heads in the sand, ignore the problem, and to heck with the senior citizens, and to heck with their children who worry about how they're going to have their parents live their last years and lives of dignity. That is not the American dream. It is not right. I urge my Republican colleagues to rethink this. Withdraw this bill. This program is not being implemented immediately. Figure out how to finance it better. Figure out how to deal with this problem. Don't simply say, let's ignore the problem and to hell with our senior citizens. That is not the American dream. We simply do better. We've made a start. Let us continue that start. Let us build on it. Let us not destroy the beginnings that we have made. I thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow's Groundhog's Day. We've been in session this year for 1 month, and this is the first day of the second month. And we've had 2 legislative days and haven't done one single thing for the working Americans in this country. Now, this bill is the whole reason why the Occupy Wall Street movement is out there and why the opinion of the performance of the Congress is so low. This bill has absolutely nothing to do with creating jobs, training the unemployed, helping businesses grow, or moving the country forward. It is about the 9th time we brought a piece of so-called Obamacare. Obama does care, you know. They brought it out here, and they keep trying to repeal it, which is not what the people want us working on. Instead, the Republicans are giving us just a bunch of press releases. I can see them going out of the offices now to the Tea Party all over the country. Rile up the base, oh yeah. And nothing is being done for the people. The second problem is that the Republicans aren't being straight with the American people. This bill does more than the Republicans are saying. The Republicans aren't just repealing the Class Act. The Republicans are trying to kill another important and inexpensive program that seniors and families depend on. They're defunding the National Clearinghouse for Long-Term Care Information, an important and useful government website that seniors and families use to take an active role in understanding, planning, and financing their long-term needs. Remember, these are the most frail people in our society, and they rely on this information to plan for their futures. Mr. Speaker, 2/3 of personal bankruptcies in this country are caused by medical bills, and a lot of those astronomical bills are caused by the debilitating costs of long-term care. And the Republicans aren't trying to solve the problem. Instead, the Republicans want to repeal the first ever federal law creating a standalone long-term care program. Bill Frist, the Republican leader in the Senate some years ago, said, don't repeal it, fix it. But the Republicans can't figure out how to fix it because they don't care about seniors. Granted, this Class Act needs to be fixed. It's not a perfect bill. We know that. And that's what we should be doing so that the country stops allowing long-term health care to bankrupt families. That the Republicans don't care enough to do anything about chronic bankruptcies caused by long-term care is bad enough. But the Republican wrecking ball goes even further. The Republicans are trying to get a scalp. They want to please their base by repealing a part of Obamacare, that law that ensures 31 million more Americans and saves taxpayers money. So-called Obamacare, that law that already is driving down health care costs and getting Americans better service for less money. In 40 years of legislating, I've seen state houses shift parties, Congress switch parties, but I've never, ever seen a legislative body that failed as badly as this one. This is the most unproductive Congress I've ever seen. And if you think this bill's going to go out of here and go over to the Senate, even the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, wouldn't want this brought up as the bill that we deal with. The Republicans are running their demonize everything and do nothing agenda, and it's having predictable results. It gets the base whipped up and angry, but it accomplishes nothing for jobs, nothing for health care, nothing for the deficit, nothing for the economy. The American people need the Class Act fixed. They need to be able to continue to rely on the clearinghouse for long-term care information. As Republicans put out their plan for wasting this entire year of 2012 by not serving the American people, the voters should look very carefully at what they actually are doing. When they put out their platform, you know, it's going to say, what did you do? Well, I voted no. I voted no. I voted no. I voted no. They will have nothing positive to put on that agenda. What did you do? Well, I tried to get rid of the EPA. I didn't want clean air. I didn't want clean water. And I didn't want labor unions. And no, no, no. This is a terrible piece of legislation. It should be fixed. There's none of us who would stand up here and say it's a perfect piece of legislation. But I urge my colleagues to vote no.
Gentleman's time.